This is TWiT.
There's actually some very exciting news out of Redmond, and this is why I wanted you back for the first module after the wildcards. We were actually going to do Perl, but when I read this, I said, oh, Lou's got to come back. He's got to talk about this. One of the issues that we've always had with the C# modules, because remember, we've done 2 so far, has been people say, well, it's Windows specific. You know, unless you're running a Windows system, why are you going to want to use .NET? Why would you want to use C#? Well, Lou, you want to tell us a little something about what happened at Redmond about, what, a week and a half ago?
You bet. So, I mean, originally the C# language was open source, which means that the language itself, the language spec, the entire thing was kind of open source, allowed people like the Mono people to kind of build a framework around Linux and OS X that was kind of third party, and allowed them to have things like Xamarin Studio and stuff like that to be able to build on Mac, but it wasn't really supported directly by people who created it, that being Microsoft. So just recently, like you said last week, Microsoft has decided to kind of open source the entire thing. Not only the language itself, but the compiler and the platform, and making it soon readily available on all of these platforms, whether it be Linux or Mac or OS X or Windows. So that's kind of the key. Is it's breaking open the entire thing, and it also allows you to build apps like Android and iOS apps directly on inside of Visual Studio, which is another huge kind of leap forward for everyone who likes Visual Studio too.
Yeah. Now Redmond has announced that they're going to be releasing the entire .NET server stack. So everything that has to do with serving things out, connecting back to databases, creating pages, that's all completely open source. They are holding back a tiny bit on the client side, but as you said, if you want to develop in .NET for Android or OS X, that's now completely possible. What I like about this is they're going to be working with Xamarin, specifically the Xamarin-sponsored group known as Mono, to create the framework, the .NET framework based on C# for both Android and OS X, and I'm assuming eventually for iOS, which means we're getting down to that true write once, compile many times. Write it, compile it for Windows, compile it for OS X, compile it for Android, which is Linux. How does that change the game for you as a developer?
It's huge because I mean, a majority of the code that I write is C#. It's all in the kind of what we call the Windows stack. But now it gives me that ability, that experience that I have to kind of take it forward and move it to these other platforms. I think a lot of Java developers today kind of have that experience because they can build it for Android, they can build it for OS X, they can build it for Windows, they could build it for Linux. What they didn't have is like iOS, and so now this kind of opens the door to that for C# as well, as it gives that ability to kind of go across platform and be able to use really cool IDEs like Visual Studio. I mean, to me, it doesn't matter who you talk to, whether a Windows developer or not, Visual Studio is really kind of the pinnacle in IDE web development for web and programming today. So it's a really cool app.
We've got Sideways in the chat room who's saying, oh, .NET is a marketing scheme, whereas Microsoft forces you to buy new OS and hardware to be able to use their ID to write code on. That's something I've heard a lot. In fact, when we did the first 2 modules, they were all saying, oh, so you just want us to buy Windows. So you just, no, that's what this whole announcement is about. You don't. In fact, Microsoft's going to be releasing a fully featured, a fully functional version of the Visual Studio for everyone to use. So, you know, they're not going to break it down. This is really going to hurt the bottom line because Microsoft was making a lot of money. You know, maybe that's not a topic for this particular show, but Lou, I'd love to hear your insight on why now? Why do this when Microsoft could have just kept it the old way and, again, yeah, forced people to use Windows, forced people to buy new hardware, rather than just say, here you go, and we hope you develop for it.
I don't know. I think personally, I think that most of Microsoft has had a narrow scope around enterprise, around like Windows apps and Windows Phone apps, and you know, this new kind of structure that Microsoft's kind of turning itself into is, you know, cross-platform, cloud services, platform, that kind of thing, and making it readily available to everyone to use and everyone to kind of people who have different experiences and different things can also use these things as well. And so, I mean, we've always had really good platforms and services. It's just that people don't want to use them because they kind of have to intermix with other technologies they don't understand. I think that's where we're going. That's where we're making it easier for everybody to kind of use what Microsoft can actually deploy around services and support and Azure and C# and .NET. Really easy languages like .NET languages. I think it's about time that we start doing that and broadening our spectrum, broadening our scope. And I think that's just where we're going. We're heading.